This is the story of one of my favourite characters in Scottish history. Meet Agnes Randolph, the Countess of Dunbar.
Known as Black Agnes, and she was a badass. This is Dunbar, a very wild and windy Dunbar. In fact, I've already nearly lost a drone to the weather. The monstrosity behind me there is what's left of Dunbar Castle. It's a bit of a beast. It's thought there would have been a fortification here back to the Votadini or the Gododin in the Iron Age. Dunbar means the fort of the point in Brythonic. It's pretty cool now, all deconstructed, smashed up like a hipster's breakfast. But back in the day, this was a full-on construction. And you can kind of see that from some of the holes and where they might join up. During the Second War of Independence, this was Agnes's place. And with its location, it was strategically important. Everyone knows about the First Scottish War of Independence, the one with William Wallace and Robert the Bruce and Edward the Longshanks, etc. But you don't hear as much about the Second War of Independence. William Wallace had fought for John Balliol, who was king at the time but was stripped of his crown by Edward I, aka Longshanks. He was eventually replaced by Robert the Bruce, but by 1332, Edward Balliol, John's son, thought he should have the crown and launched an invasion backed by Edward III of England. We were getting through the Edwards pretty quickly by this point. Robert the Bruce had died, and his son, David II, had been on the throne for about 3 years. He was 8 years old. Agnes was married to Patrick Dunbar, the governor of Berwick, and maybe because of his closeness to the border, owning lands on both sides of it, he was a bit of a flip-flopper. He liked to hedge his bets in the whole Wars of Independence thing. In fact, when Robert the Bruce's army beat Edward II's army in the Battle of Bannockburn in 1314, Patrick gave Edward shelter as he made his escape. But that was before he married Agnes. She knew what she wanted. She was known as Black Agnes, probably because of her hair, and she was a Randolph, and they had form. Her father, Thomas Randolph, was the Earl of Murray and Robert the Bruce's nephew and friend in arms. If you walk through the inner gates of Edinburgh Castle, you'll see a plaque dedicated to Thomas on the wall. During the First War of Independence, he'd scaled Edinburgh Castle's walls, liberating it from the occupying English army, and then razed it to the ground. Robert the Bruce didn't really like castles. He was a guerrilla at heart, so that kind of meant it was just something to lose. On the 13th of January 1338, while Patrick Dunbar was away fighting, no doubt egged on by his wife, William Montagu, the Earl of Salisbury, had seen an opportunity and laid siege to Dunbar Castle. He'd end up regretting it. Montagu was best pals with Edward III, the grandson of the more famous Longshanks, so it wasn't like he was going it alone or lacked resources. Agnes was at home with her servants and a skeleton staff of guards. When Montagu turned up here and kicked off his siege, Agnes was defiant. According to the legend, she supposedly declared, "Of Scotland's king I haud my house, I pay him meat and fee, and I will keep my good old house, while my house will keep me." I'm not entirely sure why she was talking in rhyme, but we'll take it with a big dash of salt. The Earl of Salisbury wasn't impressed with her poetry, so he got to work. He rained down projectiles on the castle, rocks fired from trebuchets, a kind of 14th century catapult designed for sieges. After they'd stopped for a bit, Agnes sent out one of her ladies-in-waiting, who went up to the ramparts, where she made a big show of dusting them off with her handkerchief. But the Earl wasn't done yet. He deployed another siege engine, a sow, a battering ram, sometimes a log with a steel tip, suspended from slings on a frame. Agnes told Salisbury he should take care of his sow. Then she had some of her guards get one or some of the boulders he'd thrown over and drop it on his toy, smashing it to pieces. But like a sort of chainmail wearing wily coyote, Salisbury hadn't had quite enough. He arranged for one of the men on the gate to be bribed. The guard took the money and then went straight to Agnes. The English army made their advance on the gate, but they were expected. Montague wanted to be the first man in, but he was overtaken by one of his soldiers. When the man went through the gate, Agnes's men dropped the portcullis, separating him from the rest of the army. They thought they'd got the Earl. Agnes apparently said that she was sorry they wouldn't be getting to sup with him, and that they wouldn't have his help defending the castle against the English. Montague tried everything. Supposedly, he even brought Agnes's brother, John Randolph, the 3rd Earl of Murray, to Dunbar and threatened to hang him there and then. The story goes that Agnes was undeterred and told him that she'd only benefit from his death. She was his heir and would inherit his lands. Although that part of the story could be confused with the siege of Berwick in 1333, when the Setons watched their own son executed. The siege dragged on for nearly 5 months. Supplies inside the castle were getting low. Eventually, Sir Alexander Ramsay of Dalhousie brought 40 men along with supplies by sea. They're thought to have entered by a postern, a small side entrance down there on the shore somewhere, then exited through the front gates, rushing the English advance guard and chasing them all the way back to their camp. On the 10th of June 1338, Montague was done. He'd had enough. The siege had cost the English crown £6,000, and Agnes wasn't going anywhere. He retreated back over the border. Edward Balliol's invasion attempt failed, and Edward III turned his attention to more continental ambitions. There was a ballad composed about the siege of Dunbar. In it, the Earl of Salisbury sings, "Cam I early, cam I late, I found Agnes at the gate." This is one of my favourite stories, probably because it's not that well known. Because of this location, I just love Agnes's grit, determination, sheer bloody mindedness. That and her sarcastic sense of humour. She kind of reminds me of someone. Obviously it happened a long time ago, and there will undoubtedly have been embellishments over time. But it's always good to hear a different perspective on the wars of independence. It's not all about Australians and dodgy kilts, you know.